Um, so before we hear from our speakers today, I want to do a review of some of the things we've learned and discussed over the past month. All right, so our first question, the UN agency with a mandate to protect and support refugees is, you've got some choices: UNICEF, UNHCR, International Office of Migration, or the UN Security Council. All right. UNHCR. Excellent. I'm glad you guys are all on that Office of International Migration, or International Office of Migration. That was my own test. So everyone had this one right. UNHCR stands for the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, and it has been the lead agency mandated to aid and protect refugees since 1950. You will also recall that UNRWA, the UN Relief and Works Agency, plays a leading role in supporting Palestinian refugees. So our next question, there are over 100 million forcibly displaced people around the world. The majority of them are refugees, internationally displaced people, or asylum seekers. Go ahead, and if you don't have access to Mentimeter, you're welcome to use the chat to put in your answers. All right. You guys are by and large correct. The majority of displaced people around the world are internally displaced people. Out of the 108.4 million forcibly displaced people around the world, 62.5 million are IDPs and 29.4 million are refugees under UNHCR's mandate. And I did not record the number of people who are asylum seekers, even though I gave you that as an option. So something that we can all do our homework on. Which of the following four are not included in the formal definition of a refugee? 1, they are outside of their country of origin. 2, they are unwilling or unable to return to their country of origin. 3, they have a well-founded fear of persecution. Or 4, they fled their country because of climate change. Again, which of those is not included in the formal definition of a refugee? They're outside of their country of origin, they're unwilling or unable to return to their country of origin, they have a well-founded fear of persecution, and they have fled their country because of climate change. And you are totally on it. Climate change is not explicitly written into the definition of a refugee, according to the 1951 Convention on the Status of Refugees. All right, true or false? Less than 1% of refugees are able to access resettlement as a durable solution. You'll recall our durable solutions include resettlement, repatriation, and local integration. True, less than 1% of refugees are able to access resettlement. In 2022, is this number right? 11,400, no, I think I wrote down the wrong number. So that's another thing. No, I think that's right. 114,300 refugees were resettled, and 6 million displaced people returned home. I'm going to put that number in the chat in case I am reading it wrong. The US refugee ceiling for fiscal year 23 is 18,000, 60,000, 125,000, or 250,000. You'll recall from our presentations last week that every year the president sets a ceiling, a refugee ceiling for the maximum number of refugees we can resettle in the United States. And that number varies. As you recall, it was dramatically lower during the Trump administration. The Biden administration has increased it. And the question is, what is it in this fiscal year? $125,000. So the refugee ceiling is set this year at 125,000. However, from October of 2022 to May 31st of 2023, we have only resettled 31,797 refugees. So we are not close to hitting that ceiling in the refugee assistance program or resettlement program, right? If you recall from our presenter last week, there are other programs that resettle refugees. There was a special program to resettle Afghans in 2021. We've got special programs resettling Ukrainians, but our kind of broad and general resettlement program is this one. Let's see. What is one thing that stands out to you about refugee experiences around the world? Right? You've heard from a range of refugees. You've heard about refugee experiences with climate change. You've heard about, we could even make this broader because we haven't just talked about refugees. We've talked about different kinds of displaced people. We've heard about IDPs. We heard from resettled refugees. What is one thing that stands out to you about their experiences? Great, they're different, they're similar, but yet so different. Exceptionally long waiting periods for any resettlement process. Continued hope for a better life despite all the trials and tribulations, absolutely. Their resilience and drive to move forward. They're trying to make a better life for themselves and their families. The conditions in camps stand out. The length that people stay in limbo, waiting in camps. Refugees live long-term and temporary places, absolutely. They're creating their own countries within a new country. They have to wait so long. The resilience of refugees living in camps for decades. Yes, there are refugees that we heard from even who've been living in camps for years and years and years. The experience of refugees are not always like they're depicted in popular media. Absolutely. Everyone has a unique story. They are real people, not just numbers. Yes, and you'll recall when I opened, I think in our opening of this, we talked about kind of a sociological perspective and an anthropological perspective, right? And that was one thing I wanted you to take away, was both kind of the broad trends and numbers and policies, but also these unique stories that make each individual experience different. The lack of clarity about pathways to durable solutions. Yes, and I think that's both, you know, we can talk about that in the policies themselves, but also how refugees see and experience those pathways. Their experience in general, families, distrust, loneliness, a waiting period, those who are still in refugee camps after 10 plus years. Yes. Much more complicated than most people want to understand. And there's more bias in the system than should be. Great. The separation of families and how each family can be stuck with different legal statuses and locations. Yes, and we heard about that from several of our presenters, but last week, Nahid and Abdullah both have families in different parts of the world. Bravery and resilience. Yep, long and difficult processes. Oh, I see. Each family member can be stuck with different legal statuses. Yes. Thanks, Gabriel. A lot of times people have to repay back the flight that was provided. Yeah. Our speaker last week told us that. I didn't know that either. That was shocking. The length of time that people spend in camps. And I'm going to take a minute to remind you that people also spend long periods of time in urban areas. And I know there are some things that make urban areas more appealing than camps, but those conditions can also be really, really terrible and difficult. Prioritization of countries for IDPs, perhaps. If the person who wrote that wants to clarify that in the chat, I'm not 100% sure what that means. The amount of trauma and difficulties the refugee must face to adapt to a new culture and language, etc. Yeah. And I think that we can think about that both in countries of asylum as well as in resettlement. And one thing I'll plug, talking about resettlement, is a podcast series called Resettled that I think it's a 6-part or 8-part series. I think it's 6, that where you hear experiences of resettled refugees, and it is really well done. And they talk about kind of the re-traumatization that refugees can experience in adapting to life in the US. Not a journey they would have taken, a forced decision that changes their lives forever. Absolutely. And the video in our first, if you remember our second session where Rowan Arar spoke, and she said, she referenced a video that she didn't actually have us watch, but it's on our digital toolbox, and it does a really nice job of kind of showing how much this is not an experience. This is not something anyone thinks they're going to do, right? And then conditions in your hometown and country change, and you've got to do it. The hope for a better life and willing to take unnecessary risks that are inherently dangerous. Yeah. That they're all different. Absolutely. And I'm glad that a couple of you have said that. That is something I think is so important to understand, especially if we're thinking about working with refugees, if we're thinking about creating refugee policy. We want to keep in mind the differences of experiences. The hope they have for their children to have better lives and access education. Yeah. The trauma refugees endure. Women and children are very vulnerable in these situations. Absolutely. The word home is forever distorted and remote. Yeah. And I think there's a lot of scholarship out there kind of thinking about what home even means, right? And what that means for a refugee or for someone who is displaced. Because one thing I'm not sure we haven't talked about repatriation in depth, but one thing that I teach in my class is that refugees often have this idea that they want to go home, but home is no longer the place. It's not the same as the place they left, right? And they end up making new homes in their countries of asylum. And if they are able to repatriate, that home is very different. And then we can ask questions, is that really home? What does home mean? Adapting to different cultures and difficulties of leaving their family back at home. Yep. And the lack of concern worldwide when the situation is worsening. Absolutely. And I think we see that particularly in cases of protracted refugee situations, right? And I'm not sure that's a term we've discussed over the seminar, but a protracted refugee situation is technically defined by a refugee situation that has lasted for over 5 years and has at least a certain number of refugees. If anyone can remind me what that number is in the chat, I will not really give you a prize, but virtually give you a prize. There's a certain number that that determines the protracted refugee situation. But yes, and we have seen over time and in recent years, more and more refugees situations are protracted. I think the average refugee situation lasts about 17 years. And we certainly see a lot of donor fatigue over time. So refugees in those protracted situations aren't getting the same amount of support that they need. And certainly the media loses attention, at least 25,000 people. Thank you, Shane. The media loses attention, and there becomes this lack of concern worldwide when situations can be really, really difficult. Shoot, I forgot. I think we have one more question, but I want to keep us, well, what is one thing you are taking away from this seminar series? And I'm going to ask you, yeah, we still have a few minutes. I think this is our last question. Great. Diversity, increased empathy, and a feeling that we all need to take action. What can we do? That is a great setup for what we're going to talk about today. The problems in the system and what is not working. There's a lot to do and a lot being done. While the seminars have been informative, I still have a lot to learn. Absolutely. And I'll tell you, in planning this, it was so hard to figure out what are the essential pieces of information that we can include in 5 90-minute sessions. A better awareness of the magnitude of the situation, personal refugee stories. We don't always get to connect directly with the themes we're learning about. Great. All the information that I received that I can bring to my job, personal stories of refugees, the situation needs to change, the need for the work to be done, the need for systemic change. Yeah, and one thing we haven't talked about is root causes, right? One theory around changing and addressing refugee situations. We've talked about resettlement, we've talked about durable solutions, about making countries of asylum more comfortable and safe, but we haven't actually talked about getting at the root causes, right? If we ended violence, if we prevented conflict, we wouldn't have refugee situations in the first place, right? So systemic change on different levels needs to happen. The status of refugee impacting all levels of one's life. Yes, there's a need for continued education and awareness raising on this issue. Absolutely. Opening the door to better understanding and inspiring, digging deeper into these situations. The growing need to be involved in writing a Fulbright to get on the front line. Absolutely. How much is being done already? I was surprised with all the different countries such as Australia preparing for climate refugees, and more empathy after hearing other stories. The federal government plays only a partial role. The other NGOs based domestically in the US also carry major sway. Absolutely. And I'll want to clarify here that the 10 refugee resettlement agencies that do the bulk of the resettlement, and Kira, maybe you can correct me here or add on to this, but they work as agents of the government, right? They are not agents, they're implementers of the government program. So there is a large partnership there, but they certainly do carry a lot of sway. Empathy and a need for action, better understanding of the situation. And when I listened to today's NPR report on England sending refugees to Rwanda, oh, I have not heard that. The society that I live in, which perpetuates specific consumption habits and attention toward only certain aspects of the refugee crisis, plays a part in the suffering of people across the world. Yes. Oh, and people I can contact or refer people in need of asylum. These are great. And I'm thrilled to see that you have learned so much and you're taking away so much from this series. And you Some of you have really set me up well for what I was going to say, which is that in the past few weeks, we've learned about the global system, right? We've learned about resettlement. And I hope that you have heard the many challenges in the system, and the many refugees, migrants, and other displaced people who need our support, our understanding, and our solidarity. But there's this lingering question of what can we do, right? So in the next part of the seminar, we're going to hear from 3 people across the United States who have and are taking action to make a difference in the lives of refugees. And you'll hear some of them do this as a part of their professional work, and some of them do this on a volunteer basis. So our first speaker is Walid Mosarsa, who was born in Amman, Jordan, as the grandson of a Palestinian refugee. Having witnessed the Second Intifada as a child in the West Bank and the Syrian refugee crisis in Jordan, he was moved to dedicate his time, energy, and skills to support refugees. Beginning as a volunteer, he now works with an organization called Every Campus a Refuge.
Hello everyone, I'm Walid Mosarsa. Currently, I serve as the Senior Program Coordinator and Secretary of the Board for Every Campus a Refuge, also known as ECAR. It's truly a pleasure to join this group of passionate changemakers today. I'm here to share briefly about my personal journey and my role at ECAR, but also about how campuses can become refuges and how each one of us can mobilize our communities to respond to global crises, such as the global refugee crisis, in meaningful local ways. My journey with ECAR started when I returned from Jordan while visiting family, having witnessed firsthand the Syrian refugee crisis there. I came back to my junior year at Guilford College, where I found Dia, then an English professor, rallying the community. Dia had been inspired by Pope Francis's call on every European parish to host a refugee, and drawing on her own personal background and mother tongue, Arabic, which uses the word sanctuary to describe a college campus, haram, Dia thought to herself, why can't colleges host refugees? Campuses are like small cities and ecosystems, with many facilities, resources, and amenities on and off campus, as well as partnerships with the local community to support successful integration for refugees. This powerful idea set the wheels in motion. As a student, I felt empowered. Here was an opportunity to actively respond to the crisis I had witnessed, to use my campus as a platform for change. I found myself swept up in her enthusiasm, passion, and the real possibility of making a difference. Historically, in the United States, we could categorize the efforts of higher education's work with refugees into 3 main approaches. First, we have services and service learning. Under this approach, campuses and volunteers go to work off campus at resettlement sites or invite refugees on campus to access limited services. Second, there's student and scholar support. Here, campus personnel provide necessary services to students who have been resettled as refugees. They also facilitate educational access for refugees who have not yet been resettled and support visiting scholars at risk. Third, we have the Campuses to Camps initiative. This involves sending faculty, staff, and students to refugee camps and temporary accommodation sites. They provide services and conduct research where refugees are located while awaiting permanent resettlement. ECAR introduced the Resettlement Campuses model. In this model, campuses provide housing, facilities, and personnel to both enrolled and non-enrolled newcomers. They serve as sponsor or co-sponsor sites for initial to medium-term resettlement, providing comprehensive integration support. As I mentioned earlier, ECAR was founded in 2015 at Guilford College, inspired by Pope Francis's call to parishes to become a refuge for displaced individuals. Our founder, Dia Abdo, took the call to heart. She asked, why not extend this call to higher education institutions? Since then, our flagship chapter at Guilford has become a testament to the power of this idea. On Guilford's campus, we've hosted over 85 refugees, offering them not just shelter, but a softer landing and a stronger start in the United States. The individuals and families that were hosted at Guilford have come from far and wide, including Afghanistan, Syria, Sudan, Iraq, Uganda, Burundi, Rwanda, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Colombia, the Central African Republic, and Venezuela. Each one of them brings unique stories, resilience, and a shared dream of safety and a better future. In 2017, ECAR took a significant step forward by becoming an incorporated 501c3, and this has allowed us to expand our reach and impact. Today, we stand committed to our vision of turning campuses into refuges, one university at a time. There are 17 chapters in the ECAR network, and collectively, our chapters have hosted over 350 refugees. ECAR's mission is to mobilize colleges and universities to host refugees on campus grounds and support them in their resettlement. This comes from our dream of transforming the landscape of refugee resettlement and higher education, and not just looking at a handful of colleges making a difference, but thousands. We aim to create an expansive network of sustainable resettlement campus ecosystems. Colleges and universities are especially well suited for this hosting/co-sponsorship model because campuses are like cities. There are over 4,000 institutions of higher education in the United States. Imagine if each one of them hosted a refugee family. In order to empower other campuses to join us in our mission, ECAR offers a suite of streamlined resources. First, we offer a best practices manual, which is a step-by-step guide on hosting and supporting refugees on a campus. Then we provide a program coordinator handbook, the essential resource for campus coordinators overseeing refugee resettlement. We have our implementation checklists, which are roadmaps that guide campuses from the initial preparation phase to post-hosting, ensuring a thorough process. We also have a comprehensive curriculum, course syllabi, and assignments, integrating refugee support into academic pursuits. And our resource folders house practical documents like MOU templates, forms, lists, and toolkits, simplifying the administrative aspects of refugee support on a given campus. All these resources are crafted from our experiences and are designed to make the process of becoming a resettlement campus more attainable. In addition to the resources I mentioned in the previous slide, we also have training opportunities. We have monthly trainings with the Refugee Welcome Collective. We have a certificate course for higher education institutions. We have another certificate in partnership with Guilford College for community members called Advancing the Role of Community Stakeholders in Refugee Integration. We also have bi-weekly sessions for ECAR chapters during a semester in which we explore different aspects of resettlement on campus, whether from understanding global forced migration to issues faced by each campus, to sessions where each campus shares their experience working with a particular group or doing a particular project, and so on and so forth. And here are some of the benefits that universities receive if they join the ECAR network. They get implementation support checklist follow-up from us. They're eligible for evaluation, impact tracking, and publications. They are also invited to national and international partner events. They're eligible for member spotlights and national features. They're also eligible to host our annual ECAR gathering. This year, Wake Forest will be hosting our second gathering in the fall. They get funding support from us and support with fundraising efforts. It was wonderful connecting with you all, and I look forward to hearing from you about your interest in Every Campus Refuge. Here's some of our information, and feel free to reach out to me at my email, walid@everycampusrefuge.org.
Great. So Every Campus a Refuge is a wonderful organization, is one way that you all can get involved. You can work with your alma maters. If you're still in college, you can talk to your institutions. This is a really important endeavor that is available for you. Our next speaker is Morgan Hoffman. Morgan is an alum of Indiana University and recently completed her MSW from Boston College, where she served as a counselor and a graduate research associate for the Refugee and Immigration Assistance Center. As an undergraduate student here at Indiana University, she founded Room at the Table, a program designed to connect refugee families in and around Bloomington to their neighbors over communal dinners. She also served as the president of Seeking Refuge, a student group on campus that raises awareness of issues related to forced migration. And Morgan will be serving as a Peace Corps volunteer in Morocco in the fall. Morgan, over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Cohen, so much for that introduction, and thank you all for having me today. I'm so excited to be here. So to get us started, as Dr. Cohen mentioned, just going to give a short introduction about myself. So I recently graduated from the BC College of School of Social Work. I did a clinical degree with a focus on mental health, and my population I mostly served was focused on trauma and with refugees and immigrants. And so currently I'm studying for my master's level certification and licensure. And so before I start with the Peace Corps in September, which is coming up very shortly, I'm working part-time at the research program on children in adversity at Boston College with the PI, Dr. Teresa Betancourt. And I'm also serving as the mental health counselor for Refugees and Immigrants Assistance Center. It's a local community health center here in Roxbury, Massachusetts. So today I'll be focusing on my work that I did with Reclaim Childhood, or also referred to it as RC. And so I was an intern with them for 2 summers during my time as an undergraduate student. And so in the last summer I worked with them, which was from June 2021 to August 2021, I assisted their community coaches in program administration and execution of summer sports camps for girls. And I developed a 2-year curriculum for the Kudrati or leadership, teen leadership program to foster self-esteem and peer leadership. And I also facilitated monitoring and evaluation for the program. And a little bit more about Reclaim Childhood is there are a nonprofit organization based in Amman, Jordan, and they also have an office here in Boston. And so they do different sport for development programming with refugee girls. And so they focus on trauma healing and sport using those different mechanisms and engaging with girls. So they bring coaches from the community who are refugees themselves, and they lead different sports programming. They have a program throughout the year that the girls do after school. And then they also have a program in the summer that they do summer camp with some longer hours. And then we'll also work with community partners to do different summer camps throughout Jordan as well. So as I mentioned, I had the opportunity in 2021 to be based with their Jordan office to do the different tasks that I mentioned. But previously in the summer of 2020, due to the COVID-19 pandemic, I also worked with them. I was originally supposed to go to Amman again, but unfortunately, due to the state of the world, I worked remotely with them, but I was still able to do many different tasks. It was more focused on research. And so with that, my position looked like examining the different adverse effects and impacts in terms of residual trauma from the COVID-19 pandemic to the population served by RC, which I mentioned again, was young girls and women. So it was anywhere between 5 and 18 that we served refugee girls. And understanding the arising and multiple disruptions that were happening in education, social isolation, increased gender violence, especially how those impacted refugees particularly, and women as well. So all these different intersections of their identity during the COVID-19 pandemic. And then from understanding kind of these different impacts and also looking at previous epidemics, such as Ebola, I helped with the staff to produce programming to mitigate these impacts and promote recovery. And then at the end of my internship that summer, I prepared findings and recommendations for the RC board for approval to help implement that I saw out in the summer of 2021. So that's a little bit about my work that I previously did with Reclaim Childhood. And now I'm going to talk a little bit about what it was like working with refugees in a country of asylum, and also some of my work that I do now at the mental health clinic with REAC, or Refugees and Immigrants Assistance Center. And so my work primarily with the Refugee and Immigrants Assistance Center as a mental health counselor is I'm doing one-on-one psychotherapy or trauma counseling. And so I see a different range of clients that come in. And so largely it's focused, as I mentioned before, on different traumas from their identity of being refugees and then also living in the States as a refugee and immigrant. And there's a lot of discussions we have in our sessions about systematic issues that they're continuing to face, especially in Boston, we have a really bad housing crisis, so it's really expensive to live here. And then also put on top of that identities of a refugee and housing shortages. There's a lot of people who are at increased risk for not secure housing or facing houselessness. So we have a lot of discussions about that and food insecurity as well. And so this looks a little bit different in my work at Reclaim Childhood, since I was more focused when I was at Reclaim Childhood in assisting with the program development and working with the girls directly. I didn't serve in such a mental health counselor capacity. And so it was more engaging with the coaches to lead the different sports programming. So what that would look like is helping, we would start with skill-based programming at the beginning. So learning the ways how to play soccer, how to kick a ball, how to score goals, and do different warm-ups. And then we would play large soccer games together. And so it's more focused on play and engaging with girls in that manner and less of this individual counseling space. So it's been a little bit different of the roles, but definitely been enjoying both of those. And also I would say for one of the themes that I really saw both in my clients here in Boston and especially with the young girls that I worked with in Jordan was the resiliency of all of these clients that I work with. And the girls, they have faced multiple adverse events and trauma events in their life, and they still came to practice every day with huge smiles on this face and just so excited to engage with the different girls and the different programming. And it was amazing to see that RC was able to provide them the opportunity to engage with play, as that wasn't always the opportunity, especially in Jordan and as a young woman, to have that. And so bringing that opportunity to the girls and seeing how that really they were able to engage as young women was really amazing. And so we also, one of the themes was also trauma impacts and trauma-informed care. So as my work as a mental health counselor, I work largely through trauma-informed care principles. But also when I was a part of Reclaim Childhood, we focused on a lot of understanding how trauma histories might impact the behavior that we were seeing with girls. So understanding, looking at it as a larger picture and not making comments or assumptions on their behavior based on their personalities, but rather understanding how their trauma histories might impact some of their behavior presentations, and doing different exercises and conversations about conflict resolution and feelings. And that was largely brought into our team leadership program as well that I talked about before, which was called the Gujarati. And there was a lot of information that we talked about with the girls in terms of psychoeducation. So understanding what our feelings like and how to work through different emotional regulation techniques as well. And also, as I mentioned before, representation by the coaches for the girls, that was a really huge impactful thing that we saw. So this was grassroots. So the coaches were from the communities themselves and from all different backgrounds. So we had coaches from Iraq, Sudan, Somalia, for example, all over the Middle East, Palestine. And so it's bringing coaches from all these different backgrounds. And they were also mostly Muslim as well. And so having these older women be a representation for these girls and in these leadership opportunities and roles really showed the girls what opportunities were out there and helped them to engage and helping those girls navigate their different identities they were facing, and also being young Muslim refugee women in sport and giving those opportunities. They were also helping them to find different sport leagues in Boston that were also outside of RC that they could practice as well. So that was really great to see.
One of the things that I really wanted to highlight from Morgan is opportunities to volunteer, to intern, to work with refugees, both in the United States and also in countries of asylum. And so it is my pleasure now to introduce our final speaker for today, who is Kira Burdener. Kira is a program officer for domestic resettlement in PRM's Office of Refugee Admissions, where she oversees agreements with national resettlement agencies to provide for initial reception and placement of refugees admitted to the United States. She also oversees a technical assistance project in support of community sponsorship. Ms. Burdener also oversees the strategies and processes for placement of refugees admitted through the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program. And during Operation Allies Welcome, she served as the State Department lead liaison to the Interagency Resettlement Branch, as well as being the placement lead for OAW. She originally joined the Department of State in 2010 as a Presidential Management Fellow and has served in the Office of the Refugee Coordinator for Sub-Saharan Africa and the U.S. Embassy in Nairobi, and on the policy team in the Refugee Affairs Division of DHS and USCIS. She holds an MPA as well as an MA in International Studies from the University of Washington in Seattle. Kira, it is my pleasure to turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. And it is a great pleasure to be here today with all of you. I'm so excited that there are so many of you on here who have been going through our series and are interested now in how you can get involved in resettlement. So thank you for having me here today. I'm going to talk a little bit first about my experience with OAW to give you just a little taste of what our work in our office looks like and what our experience has been the last couple of years. And then I'm going to probably flood you with a number of links in the chat of ways that you also can get involved based on your interest. But to start with, as mentioned, I've worked at PRM for about 13 years now, and the U.S. Refugee Resettlement Program has changed a lot in that time from when I joined, from a program that was kind of a niche program that a lot of Americans had never heard of, and to one that has been in the limelight in some positive ways and some uncomfortable ways a lot in recent years. So it's changed a lot. To talk about Operation Allies Welcome, I'm going to take you back to the summer of 2021 and talk about, again, Operation Allies Welcome was the U.S. resettlement response to the Afghanistan crisis. At that point in our team, we had a very small team. We had our section chief, myself, one other program officer, and a young analyst who was only a couple years out of college herself. The Biden administration had come in earlier that year with a really clear and very ambitious desire to regrow U.S. refugee resettlement, but it had only been a few months. And I would love to be able to tell you that federal hiring has improved, but it is still not the most nimble thing, even in the best of times. So we were a small but mighty team that summer. And we'd already started, we came out of the gate, we knew that this administration cared deeply about refugee resettlement. And so we came out of the gate ready to go, brought in all of our partners to see how can we did not wait for OAW to start rebuilding the program. We'd already had that underway. However, after the fall of Kabul and that historic airlift operation that took place, we soon found ourselves with over 70,000 Afghans at US military bases around the country. And our team needed to come up with a process and a structure to resettle them off of those military bases to communities across the country who could support them, who could receive them and help them begin their process of resettling. And this was what we know now as Operation Allies Welcome, or OAW. So we knew we needed to ramp up to resettling about 4,000 Afghans per week off of these US military bases, which was a huge number, even thinking historically for this program, for the US Refugee Admissions Program, but also given the really frank and stark reality that our system on the domestic side was smaller than it had ever been. Under the prior administration, we lost over a third of our resettlement agency network. And even for those local offices that stayed open, we lost a lot of institutional memory as they had to let people go without arrivals there to serve. To give you just, to not put too fine a point on this, but give you a little bit more context, in the 2 years prior to OAW, we have resettled only about 11,000 refugees each year, per year. And now we were looking at 4,000 a week. And this translated to about 72,000, actually a bit more, over just over 4 months. In the midst of a nationwide housing crisis, I heard our prior speaker mentioned Boston. And yes, Boston has long had a really severe housing crisis, but unfortunately, this is something I think all of us are painfully aware of. This is everywhere in our country. Housing is all housing is hard to find, let alone affordable housing, let alone safe and sanitary and affordable housing. So we also had a staffing crisis, a labor shortage for jobs that are really hard. Resettlement jobs are hard, and they don't tend to always pay that well. And we were in the midst of COVID. So it seemed rather a monumental task in front of us. And my job during this time was to lead the placement process, how we were going to figure out where all of these 70,000 plus people were going to go after leaving safe havens, which is what we called the US military bases that were hosting our newcomers. And it was immediately apparent that we couldn't rely on our normal systems and our normal processes. This was a crisis situation. This needed emergency response. Now, we'd been resettling Afghans for years, and we knew that they have extraordinarily high rates of having a US tie, a family member or friend already living here in the US that they wanted to join. And those US ties were very, very heavily concentrated in a very small number of locations. So primarily Sacramento, Northern Virginia, and a handful of locations in Texas. And we knew we couldn't send 70,000 people to 3 locations. And regardless of placement location, we couldn't send all 70,000 people out to resettlement communities all in the same week or even the same month without entirely shutting down our program, overwhelming communities, and most importantly, putting new arrivals at risk, their well-being at risk, by sending them to organizations and communities that weren't prepared to receive them. So I will tell you, there was no small amount of skepticism regarding whether we were going to be successful at this task. In fact, there were some colleagues from other agencies who were quite certain we would not be successful, that it was not possible for us to be successful. And to be perfectly honest, I also worried throughout the entire operation on a daily, nightly basis that we would also not be, how would we make this impossible thing happen? And so I'm very pleased to tell you that we proved the skeptics wrong, and we were able to make it happen. So first, we devised a rather unprecedented process to not only plan out where refugees, where each family would be resettled based on location of US ties where we could honor that, but also to schedule travel out over the course of several months so that the US government, our local partners, our NGO partners, and community members had that information that they needed to plan to figure out where the gaps were and start to address those and see what they needed to get in place. It also allowed us to adjust for travel plans for all of these tens of thousands of people based on not only that local community capacity, but also the needs of the refugees themselves. Some had very urgent medical needs, some had protection concerns. And we were hosting them at US military bases, and the Department of Defense had their priority order for when each of these bases needed to close in order to return to their normal operations. So we needed to be able to work with that as well and feed that all into the same system. So in parallel, while we were coming up with this extraordinary travel plan, we also worked with our state and local partners to support them in as many new ways as we possibly could to be able to receive such large numbers of new arrivals at an unprecedented pace in modern US resettlement history. We established a new interagency resettlement branch structure to jointly coordinate and leverage resources across the federal government, as well as develop innovations to support effective, timely resettlement into all of our different communities. This resettlement branch included participation from over 6 different federal agencies and allowed us to really quickly work together to address problems as they came up in real time and develop solutions in real time to support our local communities to do it. At the end of the day, resettlement happens at the local level in this country. It works because communities make it work. And so our job was to support our communities as best we could and then get out of the way so they could do what they needed to do. And as a side note, this particular innovation, the establishment of an interagency resettlement branch, was so successful that we've since formalized it and institutionalized it as an ongoing, enduring part of US resettlement infrastructure. And it continues to serve to this day as a vital platform while we work to strengthen and improve US refugee resettlement for all of our new arrivals, not just for Afghans. So we jointly manage it between the State Department, between our colleagues at Health and Human Services and the Office of Refugee Resettlement, and at the Department of Homeland Security, U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. So the 3 of us jointly manage it, and we bring in other agencies as needed. So I'm very excited about that. OAW was truly, though, a whole of country effort. Government, nonprofits, private sector, local communities. It worked because everybody came together in extraordinary ways. And I will be forever grateful for and inspired by how people came together. The outpouring of care from Americans seeking to help, and especially from the Afghan American community, was just phenomenal. It was incredibly generous and heartwarming. And every day, by all rights, we should have seen massive failures across the country because of what we were asking people to do, this impossible thing. And we didn't. People made it work. It wasn't always pretty. It certainly wasn't always linear, but it worked. And I want to say getting to serve in Operation Allies Welcome will really forever be a highlight of my career. I will always remember it. It was, without question, the hardest work I have ever had the honor to undertake. Like I said, it wasn't always pretty. We tried a lot of new things and not everything worked, but we had support to try new things. We had support to be innovative, and that means having the support to not be successful with everything you tried. So we learned and then we pivoted. And we've taken those lessons that we learned in OAW as we've moved forward to build back a U.S. refugee resettlement program that can rise to better meet the historic global need that you've been learning about, to provide durable solutions for those forced to flee their homes. So I'm really excited about what we've been able to take from that and move forward with. So this leads me to the second portion of what I wanted to share, which is how you can get involved. So I'm going to start, maybe selfishly, with a plug for the Federal Civil Service. I know the federal government does not have the most exciting or sexy image, but I can tell you that it is incredibly meaningful to get to work to set policy and manage programs at the federal level. I also get to work with some truly amazing people, and we need more amazing people to join the federal government. So please consider it if you haven't before. For those of you who will soon be finishing graduate school or have recently completed in the last couple of years your graduate program, I highly recommend checking out the Presidential Management Fellows Program. As noted, that's how I came into the federal government a few years ago. And it is a postgraduate program, takes about 2 years. And upon successful completion of the program, you convert to civil service. And through that program, that is how I was able to not only take specialized training with the State Department, but I also did details assignments at other agencies and in other offices, including, as was mentioned, the Department of Homeland Security on their refugee policy team, and at the U.S. Embassy in Nairobi in the Office of the Refugee Coordinator for Sub-Saharan Africa. And those were phenomenal experiences. So it is an incredible experience, a great way to get involved in the federal government if that's something you think you might be interested in. I will tell you it is a lengthy process, so please be prepared to be patient and don't quit your job until you have the offer. I'm going to put a quick link in the chat. Excellent. So moving on, there are, of course, many other ways to get involved in refugee resettlement outside of joining the federal government. If you are interested in employment in resettlement, this is a great time for you. We have resettlement agencies. As mentioned, there are 10 national agencies. I'm thrilled to say, as of last week, we just approved 9 more. So we have now over 300 local offices around the country. We've just surpassed the 300 mark, which gets us back up to the number that we were at before we lost a third of our network under the last administration. 10 national agencies, all of them are hiring. Over 300 local offices around the country, nearly all of them are hiring. They can't hire fast enough. We have unfortunately, we don't at this time, we had to take it down for a minute while we updated it. We don't have a directory of all of those 300 offices up on this website, but it will shortly in the next week or two be back up. And in the interim, we have the list of the 10 national agencies there. I just put it in. This is, I know it doesn't look like a government website, but it is indeed our government website through the Refugee Processing Center. Has RMP agency contacts. There's a list of the national agencies if you want to check them out. They're, I'm sure, all at the national level hiring if that interests you. If you want to look for employment in your local resettlement agency, there's a map of affiliates right now, and we will shortly have a affiliate directory so you can see who's open around you if you're not already aware. Regardless, I encourage you to become aware of the resettlement agencies active in your communities. There are a lot of ways to get involved with them. Before I move to that, though, I do want to note we also have hiring opportunities overseas, if that is of interest to you, with our resettlement support centers. The International Organization for Migration, IOM, runs a number of our resettlement support centers overseas. These are the locations that manage the case processing of refugees resettling to the US, and it's a great experience if you want to get involved and see how it actually works to go from a refugee being referred to the United States for resettlement to actually arriving and all the steps in between. We also have several resettlement support centers that are run by NGOs, including Church World Service, the International Rescue Committee, HIAS, and the International Catholic Migration Committee. So all of them, check them out, take a look. Finally, and this is most important, if you like your day job, that's great. There's a lot of other important work happening, but you want to get involved in your community outside of your day job in resettlement. A lot of ways to do that. Like I said, get to know who the resettlement agencies are in your community if you're not familiar with them already. Almost all of them have volunteer opportunities and they rely on volunteers. So if you only have an hour to give a month, there are things you can do. Your help is needed. If you have more time than that and more interest, you want to do more than just one-off or, small amounts of volunteering, we call it co-sponsorship. And I'm going to pop in the chat here a link to the Refugee Welcome Collective, which is a technical assistance program that we fund. They're called different names at different local resettlement agency offices, but this is where you can form a group of you and your friends, through your workplace, whatever it might be, and you want to really support a newly arriving refugee or refugee family. This is where you can partner with a local resettlement agency, and you're going to take on, this is where if you're interested in doing more than just the really fun stuff of meeting somebody at the airport with the teddy bear, but you really want to get involved and help them go to the local social service office and wait with them for 4 hours while they wait for their name to be called and walk through that frustrating process with them and learn what it's like to be a new arrival in this country. That's a great way to get involved, and you do it in partnership with a local resettlement agency. It's an incredible experience. So take a look at refugeewelcome.org. There's a lot of information about community sponsorship. And finally, the third way I want to mention is private sponsorship. This is a brand new initiative just announced in January of this year. I know we talk a lot about sponsorship before now, especially with Ukraine and then with other initiatives that have come up. Those aren't really what I would call private sponsorship. It's more financial supportership. So this is the first time the US has taken on, in a structured way, private sponsorship. We are really excited about it. I will pop the Welcome Corps, that's the name of this program, the Welcome Corps website in the chat. This is, if you want, there's a lot of training, a lot of vetting, and a lot of support too. Group of 5 individuals come together. You have to raise some money. You have to go through a lot of training, but you're going to take on all of the initial resettlement responsibilities. It is probably the most direct way to get involved and add some capacity to our country of being able to welcome refugees to our country. We are facing a lot of challenges right now in terms of our domestic capacity to receive receive refugees. And so this is a really great direct way. And I also want you to be aware that very, very soon, perhaps if you were to check the website late next week, you will hear more, that we are about to launch a new specialized pathway regarding education. It will be called Welcome Corps on Campus, and this will be specifically for refugee students. And so keep an eye out. Maybe check the Welcome Corps website late next week and take a look if that is something you might be interested in. Now, finally, just going to shamelessly plug one other project we're working on that we're funding called Supporting Higher Education in Refugee Resettlement, or SHARE. And this is a project that's being led by World Learning in collaboration with the Ethiopian Community Development Council, the President's Alliance on Higher Education and Immigration, and Welcome.us. And SHARE seeks to identify best practices, barriers, and resource gaps faced by higher education institutions in their actual or aspirational work with refugees. And so I am going to plug that they have a needs assessment out right now. It closes at the end of this week. But those individuals affiliated with US-based colleges and universities, as well as national resettlement agencies and their local offices, we are being invited to participate in this needs assessment survey, which is aimed again at building the capacity of higher education institutions to support refugee resettlement. I think the survey is going to be open through June 30th, so the end of this week. And make sure I've got that. There we go. And then they'll share those survey conclusions afterwards with the resettlement community, with the US government, with us, obviously, but also with our resettlement agency partners and others, to see how we can do a better job to support institutes of higher education in getting involved in refugee resettlement in structural and systemic ways that are durable and not just based on an individual. And there's some great examples of that already around the country. I love that we heard from ICAR today. It's a great example. There's others too, individual examples. So we want to bring more colleges and universities on board to support the work that's being done in their community. I will stop there and happy to answer any questions too. Thank you.
So thank you all for joining us for this entire series. It has really been a privilege to learn with you over these past 5 weeks. And I and our team really look forward to seeing what you do with all of this new knowledge that you have gained. Before I send you on your way, I want to just give a huge thanks to a couple of people that have done incredible work behind the scenes. Kate Johnson, who is right now scrambling to find links for us, has been instrumental in getting everything set up, making sure our speakers show up, are prepared to talk to you all, know that their technology works. Isaiah Green has been taking care of those recordings. He has set up our digital toolbox. He's getting those recordings out to you. Jonathan Van Heck runs our Zoom. None of this would be happening without him. Shauna Hurley is the brains behind all of this. She's the one that put this all together. And Teresa Gagnon as well is the brains behind this and doing the work on the in-person seminars in particular. And so this series would not have happened without them. So thank you all so much. We're going to put in the chat a link to our evaluation form. This is different than the one we've given you before. This is to talk about the series as a whole. Please let us know what you thought of the series, how we can improve it for next year. Next year's topic won't be on refugees, but if there are kind of broad things that you want to recommend, do more breakout rooms, don't do breakout rooms, have more speakers, have less speakers, let us know. And if there's any topics that you're interested in, can't promise we'll do it, but let us know. And check out the digital toolbox, watch the recordings of any seminars that you missed. And thank you so much.